Welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast. We have made it all the way to episode 10. I'm very excited about today's episode. I want to thank those of you who have really stuck in there with me through 10 episodes and episode 0 as well, the sneak peek. Thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed, whether you're subscribing on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you're listening to this thing. Your subscription means a lot. Sharing this with people means a lot. You can also follow me at Clayton Tyner, that's Tyner, on Instagram as well as Twitter, and stay up to date. You know, if you're watching on YouTube, there's kind of the trifecta of how we build this channel. Like, that's the thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. All three of those things will really help us get the word out. Today, we are talking about courageous creativity. Now, there is a book on this subject called Creativity Inc. It's by Ed Catmull, and this is one of the two founders of Pixar. Not only do you get to hear really the story of Pixar throughout this book, but you get to hear the background of their creative process that has just put out hit after hit after hit, so many incredible record-breaking movies, the things they've been able to accomplish, the complex issues that their movies have taken on, and the way that they can relate it both to a 3-year-old kid and a 93-year-old person. Like, I mean, they are really kind of at the top of creatives in my humble opinion. Maybe you work on an assembly line, you do construction, you do some kind of manual labor. Maybe you work as a telemarketer and you're given a script and you're expected to follow that script. You can't get off of it. Maybe you are in a position or in an organization, a line of work where you just don't believe creativity applies to you. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I definitely think that there is a conceivable job where creativity is not allowed and has no part of what you're doing. However, even within the nuance of who you are and how you operate in there, I believe studying creativity can help you. If you are in a job where there is actually no creativity allowed, and I think that if you really stretched yourself, most people in most jobs at a minimum could do unique creative problem solving to come up with innovations to make their work easier, or at least more effective. But let's say you live in a scenario where there is absolutely no creativity. You need a creative outlet in your life. And so, regardless of where you're at, we are hardwired as humans to be creators, to be creative. It brings more life to living, to express creativity within us. It unlocks parts of our brain that not only make us better friends and parents and spouses, they make us more valuable employees. Creativity leads to greater mental health. Like, creativity and stretching yourself to be creative is so powerful. And the reality is that most work is creative, or at least it should be. There should be a creative aspect to what you're doing. If you're actually wanting to make a dent in the marketplace, if you're wanting your goods and services to really reach and impact people, then you need creativity. You need to build a skill set for it. You need to continually push yourself to hit new levels of creativity and consistency in creativity. If you are an Uber driver, how are you creatively going to make yourself the best Uber driver that there is? How are you not only going to keep a 5-star rating, but make sure that every person who's, steps foot inside your car has an experience that they will remember for the rest of their life? And maybe you don't want to be an Uber driver forever, but you could build the skills right now with where you're at and the opportunity that you have been given that will translate down the road into a career where you don't have to learn from scratch how to be creative. You're already building those skill sets. If you are a leader in an organization, you have to value creativity. If you want to put your best foot forward, if you want to build the best business that you can, if you want to offer the ultimate goods and services, if you want to impact the world with what you're doing in your life, it will require creativity. Creativity Inc. is a great book. The link is in the description. It is one of my all-time favorite books. I would highly suggest that you guys click that link, buy that book. You can get it, hardcover, you can get it paperback, you can even get it on Audible and listen to it. It's a fantastic, fantastic work. We're going to draw out some of the lessons from that book or right alongside some of my own experience in trying to build creativity into the organization that I've been put in charge of. Most of you who listen know that I'm the pastor of MetaChurch. We have 2 locations in the San Antonio area, and we highly, highly value creativity. We've gone through some seasons where we've been sorely disappointed with our creative output. We've gone through seasons where our creative ideas have been through the roof, and our creative application or programming of those ideas has fallen short. We've been through seasons that we look back on, and we're very proud of the ideas that we came up with and our execution of those ideas. One of the first things that Catmull talks about is the idea of having a brain trust. You need a brain trust. And what the brain trust is for Pixar is it is a collection of people who are kind of across a cross section of their Pixar organization who come in and are trusted with the earliest drafts of their films. The brain trust is not based on experience, your number of years working there. It's not necessarily based on expertise, whether you are the top animator, the top graphic designer, the top writer, or storyteller. It isn't based on position in the hierarchy. It doesn't matter if you are an executive manager or an individual contributor. The brain trust is a collection of the most effective people to push a story forward. And the book immediately, like right from the jump, admits at the beginning, all of our movies suck. Early on, I think the exact quote is early on, all of our movies suck. And it's hard to imagine a Pixar film that is anything less than just like mind blowing and world changing, but the earliest drafts that come in, and not just the first draft, but the first several drafts are very, very rough. And so they come into the brain trust, and the brain trust has one motivation above all. They have one mandate above all, and that is to be brutally, brutally honest. No holds barred. Every idea must be put on the table. It's at this point that Ed shares at Pixar, they view candor as significantly more important than honesty. Candor beats honesty in the creative process at Pixar. And maybe it would be helpful to kind of define the difference between the two. Honesty is telling the truth. We all know that, and it's critical to be honest. Honesty is telling the truth. Candor is how we tell the truth. The reason candor beats honesty is because honesty assumes someone may not be honest. If your value for creativity is honesty, then it is assuming within the room that there are some people who may not be honest. Candor assumes that honesty is inherently present in that brain trust meeting. Candor already takes out of the picture any idea that someone may be dishonest, that someone may hold back, that someone may soften the truth. Candor is not about telling the truth, it's about how we tell the truth. Everyone needs a brain trust, and you may call it your creative team. You may have your own unique name for it. At MetaChurch, we just call it the creative team. We meet weekly, and our job as the creative team is to give context to the content. What we do on Sundays is we have a sermon, and we certainly want creativity in the sermon itself. Normally, I'm the one writing those sermons. Normally, I'm the preacher. And so I'm submitting my content to the creative team. And then our job as this brain trust, as this creative team, is to give creative context that will take the content to the next level. I'm under no illusions as a preacher. Most people who clap and say amen by Wednesday, if you ask what the big idea was of that sermon, or you ask what the scripture we were looking at in that sermon, or you ask to give 2 points out of that sermon, there's a low probability that they're going to be able to do it on the spot. Just the content alone, as much as it may move them in the moment, and as much as over time it will sink in, any one sermon delivered by itself, quite honestly, with rare exceptions, doesn't do a whole lot within a short span of time. However, when we're able to connect creative context to the sermon content, the likelihood of people being able to remember it and recall it goes up in our experience exponentially. And so it's not like the content, the sermon is what's ultimately important. And if we can get some creative stuff in there, that's good too. They both sit as equals in importance because to truly be effective, they both need each other. And so if we really want to be effective, then we have to have very real candor. Everyone has to be able to come to the table and to say exactly what it is that needs to be said. What the brain trust does is it describes exactly what they see as wrong with the first draft of that movie. They describe it, but they do not prescribe how to fix it. And so there is a producer and there is a director of each movie. And we're going to talk in a minute about hierarchy and how that works in a creative setting. But those are the people who ultimately have to take all of the feedback and all of the candor from the room, take it back to the writing room, take it back to the storyboard, take it back to the animators, and figure out exactly the direction that it needs to go. However, they're not doing this alone. They're doing it in the context of the brain trust. One of the questions to ask yourself as a leader or as a member of an organization, maybe even as an artist yourself who operates more as an individual contributor, if you're going to take the step of having a brain trust, if you're going to take the step of having a team of creatives that bring their full candor to the table, do you allow someone to give an evaluation of your work or your idea if they don't have a solution? And here's what I have noticed in most creative settings, even just in most work settings in general. Most of the time, you're not allowed to bring up a problem that you see unless you're also coming with a solution to that problem. I've been told that quite a few times throughout my career before the church world and now being a pastor for the last decade or so is if I spot a problem, don't bring me a problem unless you also are bringing a solution. What are we saying when we say that? We're saying we are okay with a problem existing inside our organization. We are okay with an idea that is less than mature. We are okay with an initiative that has some serious points of failure. When you say you can't bring an eval unless you also have a solution, you can't point out a problem unless you have a fix to that problem, what you're actually communicating is I'm okay with problems. Now, when you say it like that, I mean, most leaders are going to say, well, I'm obviously not okay with problems, like I obviously want things to be as good as they can be. So if you want things to be as good as they can be, then the first thing that you want is somebody to point out every problem. You want to find all your points of failures. You want to find all of the places that you're operating below standard. You want to find all the things that are ineffective. And if you're going to find all of them, then everyone has to have permission to bring them up in real time, whether or not they know how to fix it or not. And this is the power of a brain trust. The power of a brain trust is I might see a problem and not see the solution, but I still have to bring that problem because the solution more than likely exists somewhere in that creative circle. This is the beauty of having a holistic view of creativity, and more than that, a holistic view of your organization. That it's not just me. It's not just me fighting for position. It's not just me fighting for promotion. It's not just me trying to build my own name or my own brand. It's us. It's us fighting together for a common mission. And so I see a problem, or I see a part of what you are holding and handling. I see something in your area of responsibility that is lacking. I don't know how to fix it, but I can bring it up with confidence because I know that at the end of the day, it's not about me and it's not about you. It's about us. And if it's about us, then I can bring up a problem. And then together, the 5 of us, the 10 of us, the 7 of us, the 12 of us in the room, we can put our heads together. We can come up with a solution. And if we don't have a solution, then we can talk about mitigating the problem. And if we can't figure out how to mitigate the problem, then we can push pause on something that has a point of failure. And we might save ourselves years of time and wasted money. You need a brain trust and you need candor. not just honesty. You need to have the right people in your organization, the right people on your teams where honesty is assumed. Honesty isn't like maybe we'll be honest, maybe we won't. We will be honest and we will display candor. We will be frank and we will actually fight for ideas. In the Pixar room, they talk about how things will get pretty heated. And if you were a fly on the wall in that room, you might think you're witnessing like, an episode of Jerry Springer or something. But in reality, it isn't motivated by anger. It isn't motivated even by competition among one another. It's motivated by passion. It's not people fighting each other for their ideas. It is people fighting together for the right idea. Now, candor is significant, but there are two sides to it. See, candor is only as valuable as its ability to be received. And so not only do you have to build a culture where people can be frank, can bring their whole selves to the table, can say whatever needs to be said, not that we're not considering whether or not we might hurt somebody's feelings, or not that we are just careless in the way that we critique the things that people have worked on. But at the end of the day, we have to say what we have to say. We have to bring our evals to the table. But you also have to have the other side of the culture where everyone agrees mutually that we can receive feedback, even if it is about our own participation in the process. Candor is great. But if people are existing with insecurities inside the brain trust, if people are fighting for me, not for us, if people want to be right more than they want to be excellent, then candor will fall flat, because candor is only as valuable as its ability to be received. How do we ingrain this into our cultures? Well, as leaders, we lead with our own vulnerability. We have to create the scenarios where we are critiqued heavily and hard, and we get to be the first to not only show that we can accept your candor, but that we actually begin to reward risky participation. There is real risk, and this goes back to one of our early episodes about vulnerability. There is real risk in bringing your exact eval into the room. There is real risk in pointing out a problem that you don't have a solution to, or even if you do have a solution to it. It's risky to point a finger at something that's not going well. It's risky to have seen a point of failure and bring it to the person who's responsible for it. And so what we have to do is, as a culture, we have to reward risky participation. We have to reward people. We have to reward them with our words. We have to reward them with our actions. We have to reward them socially. We have to celebrate when people are vulnerable with their evaluations, their critiques, with their candor. And then we have to reward people who can receive candor. We have to reward people who can be critiqued. We have to model it. We have to reward it. And we have to over-communicate the clarity that we are a creative organization. And to be a creative organization, we must bring candor to the forefront. We can't hold back inside the creative process and have the meeting after the meeting where we actually share the evaluations that would have changed things, where we actually share the ideas that would have pushed things forward. As soon as someone says, everyone is kind of always crapping on all of my ideas, I'm just not going to give any anymore, that person no longer belongs in the brain trust. They have to fix that part of them. That has to be met with very real, very healthy conflict. Their perspective has to shift. The creative process is so powerful, and at the same time, it can be so fragile. All it takes is a seed of insecurity to mature into a field of the weeds of animosity that will strangle out the life of your creative capacity. You need a brain trust. You need people who can come to the table and give it their all. You need people who can engage in healthy conflict, not me versus you, but us together fighting for something bigger than ourselves. You need candor. It's not whether or not we're going to be honest. We are going to be honest, and we're going to be forthright in our honesty. It doesn't mean we're going to throw all tact out the window. It doesn't mean that we are going to be a bull in a china shop. It does mean we're going to get everything on the table that we need to get on the table. And so the question is, inside this creative process, if we're going to be courageously creative, what do we do after all of the ideas are on the table? You see, what a lot of people run into in their organization is what I'm calling hierarchy horrors, the horror of hierarchy. And hierarchy has kind of like a really bad rap, and I get why, because a lot of organizations treat hierarchy as if it is the way to solve all of your organization's problems. A very clear hierarchy can make things incredibly, incredibly efficient. Like, you can get stuff done. However, the balance of hierarchy is efficiency versus effectiveness. And what can happen is, if you don't have clarity over how the creative process interacts with the hierarchy of your organization, then you are going to oftentimes lean heavily on efficiency, even to the detriment of your own effectiveness. Hierarchy, of course, is just the way your organization is structured. And a traditional hierarchy has somebody at the top, a president or CEO in the church world, a senior pastor. Under that, there is the executive team or a C-suite or the leadership team. Under each of those leaders, they have mid-level managers, or maybe that is the end of your hierarchy and that is where your teams exist. Under the mid-level managers, there are individual contributors. Under the individual contributors, there are, and it just goes down and down and down. And, a traditional hierarchy looks something like a triangle, where there is someone at the top, and then a smaller layer below them, and then a slightly larger layer below them, and then a large layer and it's a very bottom heavy. And people don't like hierarchies, and I get why. And so people have tried to do away with them. They've tried to come up with different organizational models that will completely take hierarchy out of the picture. And the reason for this, I think, is oftentimes throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There are hierarchy horrors. And what a true horror is when it comes to courageous creativity is the idea that all of your creative ideas must come from the top. And this is very, very typical inside of organizations. And so what happens is, there's one woman at the top, there's one guy at the top, or maybe there is one person at the top with a very small team. And so there's 4 or 5 people, and they come up with all of the ideas. They go up on the mountain like Moses to hear from God himself, and then they come back down to all the, regular normal people, and they say, this is the direction we're going, and this is exactly what we're going to do, and here's all of the ideas that we have, and here's what we're doing for the next 3 quarters, and here's all of our goals, and now all of you worker bees, you've heard from us, so you just go put it into action, and we expect it to come to fruition. And so what you're saying is, let's say you have an organization of 30 people, and you have one person who is the founder or the CEO, and then they have maybe a team of 4 people. And so you have 5 people out of a 30-person organization, 1/6 of the organization. And what you're betting, when you create this horror of hierarchy, you're betting that those 5 people, 1/6 of the people, will consistently have 100% of the best ideas. Okay. So you're betting, and normally someone's at an executive level, not necessarily because they are just like super high in openness and creativity. It's oftentimes because they are very good at management. They're very good at structure. They're high level strategizers. In a bad organization, it's because they're politicians. They know how to climb the ladder. They know how to kiss people's butts. That's how they get up there. However it is, it's like you're betting, first of all, that the people who are furthest removed from the ground level application of the business. If you're in a retail business, the people in the C-suite are not interacting with the customers. They're not checking people out at the cash registers. They're not actually putting the inventory on the shelves. They're not on the ground level where innovation actually happens, and yet they're the ones who are going to bring the creative innovation, although they are the furthest removed. Statistically, if you think that 1/6, I mean, you might have a 10,000 person organization, a huge business, a 1,000 person organization, a 10-person C-suite, and you're saying that 1%, I think my math is right there, 1% of the organization is going to bring 100% of the best ideas. That seems very unlikely. In fact, it seems almost impossible. You see, what Pixar does is they have this cross section, and it's not based solely on competence, and it's not based solely on position, and it's not based solely on experience or tenure. It's based on the best people that they can get in the room for that project. That's the brain trust. And so the horror of hierarchy that has caused organizations to just stagnate and die is the idea that because we have the position atop of the hierarchy, we must be responsible for all of the creative output, ideas, and decisions that come into the organization. And that is simply a horrible way to run a business. And it's a horrible way to run your life. And maybe you should have a good idea from time to time, but the sign of great leadership isn't how much power you can hold for yourself. The sign of truly great leadership is how much power you can give away. And so, how does it actually work when you look at something like a hierarchy? It obviously exists for a reason. When we talk about courageous creativity, one of the things we mean is that ideas, opinions, and evaluation, those things do not belong on a hierarchy. This is what we were just talking about. When you think that ideas, opinions, and evaluation are in fact a part of your hierarchy, then you're going to have a tiny, tiny fraction of your total employees making all the ideas, having all of the opinions, and thinking that they can make all the evaluations, even though they are usually furthest removed from the actual processes, programs, ideas, or products that you're putting out into the market. Ideas, opinions, and evaluation belong off of the hierarchy. They exist on a higher plane. They don't exist in an organizational framework like a hierarchy. They exist on the level of mission. What is your mission as an organization? What is your mission as an individual? This is the idea or the concept that if we really want to do the best we can, the best idea must consistently win. The best idea must consistently win. And so you have to ask yourself, do you want a subpar idea, a subpar process, a subpar opinion that comes from the right structure, in your idea, the right structure? Or do you want the absolute best idea that you can move on, no matter where it comes from in your organization? If it is the part-time custodian who has the best idea of what you can put your effort to in the next quarter of your year, wouldn't you want to move on it simply based on the fact that it is the best? You see, taking ideas, opinions, and evaluation off of the hierarchy, what that does is it essentially moves you into an influence-based culture. There are two things that separate Pixar's brain trust from other studios. And the first is that it is truly influence based. Everybody, everybody gets the same level of voice in that brain trust. In the creative process, it doesn't matter who you are or where you sit on the hierarchy. Everyone's voice is equal. That's very unique from Pixar to all of the other studios. In the other studios, the people who sit at the top of the hierarchy, they get to make the notes, and whether or not it is the best idea, it better get done because they're in charge and they're funding your picture. The second thing that separated them is because it was influence based. The best idea wins. I promise that you want an organization, you want to exist in a world that has almost endless upward mobility. That if someone can prove through an influence-based system by consistently having the right ideas, by consistently bringing their candor to the table, by consistently receiving feedback well, they are proving their worth inside of your organization in a way that you could never get through even the best interview process or the best quarterly or yearly reviews. Ideas, opinions, and evaluations do not belong on a hierarchy. And by doing that, you break the stagnation and the slowness of an organization who believes all of its idea, all of its innovation has to come from the top executives. Now, while ideas, opinions, and evaluations do not belong on a hierarchy, decisions, expectations, and accountability do belong on some form of hierarchy. And maybe you don't draw yours in a pyramid, and maybe you have, interconnected circles, and maybe you have pods or teams, or however you organize yourself and what you're doing. But decisions, expectations, and accountability do belong on some form of hierarchy. What Pixar does is the ideas, opinions, and evaluations, they are a free-for-all. Everyone has the same voice. But remember, the brain trust describes, it does not prescribe. It describes what it sees as the problems. It describes what it sees as the strong points. It debates fiercely and with full candor on the best ways to move forward. But then ultimately, somebody has to be belly buttoned to that decision. Somebody has to be setting clear expectations. Somebody has to be holding people accountable to their work. One of the problems that happened when people started trying to get rid of hierarchy is they started realizing that without some form of hierarchy, it's almost impossible to know when you win. Knowing when you win, when you are succeeding, requires you having accountability. And accountability becomes such a negative word, but it's literally the ability to give an account for the work that you've done. If you've done great work, you need the ability to give an account for it. And the only way to know whether or not you have done great work is if there are clear expectations outlining how you know you have won. Expectations outline how you know whether or not you are winning. Accountability lets you know when you are winning, and somebody has to be able to make the decisions. And so you walk into the brain trust, you walk into your creative meeting, and all of the hierarchical hats come off. This is how you avoid the hierarchy horrors. This is how you avoid people self-protecting and gathering power for themselves. And instead, the power is distributed to empower everybody. This is where you actually find the best ideas, the most significant innovations. This is where you get the evaluations that become game changers. This is where you locate the points of failures in your organization and mitigate them, save yourself great risk. And then you walk out of the creative meeting or the brain trust. And before you do, you assign who holds the expectation, who holds the accountability, and who is actually making the decisions based on what you gathered, the ideas, opinions, and evaluations in the room. This creates a scenario where courageous creativity becomes based truly on influence and not on position. Courageous creativity is based on influence, not on position. And that's a beautiful thing because everybody comes into the room. And you might end up, although you are 5 layers deep in the organization, assigned to make decisions, to set expectations, or to give accountability to something that normally would be assigned 4 layers ahead of you. You do that based on influence. You do that based on an opportunity to come into a room where everybody steps off the hierarchy, where everybody truly acknowledges the reality that we are, in fact, all equals. And yes, we need to organize our organizations, and that requires some form of hierarchy. And everyone who seeks to completely eradicate hierarchy, all they end up doing is creating organic forms of hierarchy that are generally far less successful. We want influence-based cultures, but that doesn't mean that creativity thrives without any organizing principles around it. Walk into the brain trust, take off the hat of hierarchy. As you walk out, you get clarity to move back into the organization and the hierarchy so that you can execute your creativity at a high level. Ed in Creativity Inc. talks about ugly babies and hungry beasts. He says, and he's already admitted early in the book, that early on, all of their movies suck. They just are not any good. And What he calls them is ugly babies. And he's using that on purpose because they're young, they're immature, they're first drafts, they're not rendered well, they're very rough animation, and the storylines don't always make sense. And there are a lot of loose ends and threads that don't really go anywhere. And there are characters that are just simply not likable yet. And there are large, overarching storylines that at the end of the day just aren't compelling. They're ugly, they're in their infancy. And there's something important to learn there because part of creativity is shipping your product. It is getting it in front of people. It's making a terrible first draft. And that can be the scariest thing to do, especially when you're bringing it to the creative team, when you're bringing it to the brain trust, knowing that they are not going to hold back on that. And that's what you need to turn an ugly baby into kind of a pudgy toddler, into like, a kind of put together elementary age kid. It's like you want to progress and mature this thing along, but it all starts as ugly babies. And oftentimes as creatives, because of our insecurities and because of our lack of assurance in a culture of candor, what we want to do is we want to hold on to our work until we find that it's perfect, until we can really be proud to put it out. And what Pixar says is you have to produce your ugly baby. You've got to do it and you've got to get it out, because as soon as we get it out, as soon as you get it in that brain trust, all of a sudden it's not just you having to hold the weight of all of the ideas. Everyone together now works towards this common goal of the best movie that you can possibly put out. So there are ugly babies and there are hungry beasts. And what Ed Catmull had noticed in Disney, who at the time they were not fully connected to, is that Disney animation had become a hungry beast. They had this string of huge successes in the 90s, and it kind of all topped off with The Lion King, which made almost $1 billion, way back in like 93 or 95 or something like that, an extraordinary amount of money for an animated movie. And because of this, Disney was like hiring and hiring and hiring so many animators. And now they had a beast of a system. They had a beast of burden, this massive expectation for their output. And so they started taking shortcuts. And instead of trying to produce ugly babies and maturing them into fantastic products, they tried to skip the infancy stage. They tried to create processes and hire enough people where they could churn out with great efficiency product after product, because they had to feed the hungry beast. Creativity forces the balance between efficiency and effectiveness. And if you were to ask most business owners, most CEOs, their highest priorities in their organization, many people would say to be as efficient as possible. And that sounds really like the correct answer. You should want to be super efficient. However, efficiency is never the first goal. The first goal is always effectiveness. Now, these things are not mutually exclusive of one another. And as a matter of fact, you should be able to be highly efficient and highly effective. However, after their first couple of successes at Pixar, they started realizing that they didn't just have ugly babies with all the time in the world to mature them. They had now become somewhat of a hungry beast. And so, as they set out for their third or fourth movie, I think it might have been Finding Nemo, they wanted to find a way to skip the dip, to skip the infancy of these ugly babies. They wanted to find efficiencies where they wouldn't have to spend the early time in the brain trust. It's like, man, we've hit like 2 or 3 smash movies. They open number 1 in the world. Surely we don't have to go through all of the early struggles. Surely we are smart enough to, just kind of jump to step 3 of the creative process. And here's what they found. There is no skipping it. You can, but you do it at great peril to yourself. And what happened with Disney is they put out a large string, like a decade and a half of absolute disasters. We see this in the bands that we love. If you've ever found a band like really early on, what you find is they're creative, they're different, they're not mainstream yet, and you begin to like really love them because they're just taking risks. They're writing songs that, probably can't be on the radio. Maybe they're too long or they're too cerebral, and they're doing things instrumentally that you just don't really see people in top 40 doing. And man, it's just so much fun. And you feel like, you are in, like you are a true fan. You're solidified with them, and you're going to follow them. You will go watch them in these dingy little bars or these little music venues. And it's almost like the worst thing that can happen is for them to get picked up by a studio, because you fell in love with them as ugly babies. You remember the first album that was produced like in somebody's bathroom or something. And then you saw them get a little bit of money and get to self-produce an album. But now they work for a studio, and the studio doesn't appreciate ugly babies. The studio is a hungry beast. And what do you see? Almost every time you begin to watch these bands that you know and love, and they start to compromise, and they start to give in, and they start to skip the parts of who they were as songwriters and musicians that made you fall in love with them. The studio needs them to be on the radio, and to be on the radio, you have to have a certain sound. You have to write a certain kind of song. And so pretty soon they begin to enmesh themselves with all of the other bands who have, and what do we call them? Sellouts, who have sold out to the man, sold out to the studio. They took that payday, and now they're making music that anybody else could make. This is the danger. It's almost like as soon as you have some creative success, the motivation is to become so efficient that you quit doing the very things that led to your creative success in the first place. And so new ideas, these ugly babies, they have to be protected from two things. They have to be protected from both early termination and lack of maturation. It's like, it's easy to throw out a first draft. It's not going to be good. The brain trust could have looked at any first draft of any Pixar movie and gone, let's move on. WALL-E was originally called Trash Planet. This is an animated kids movie that goes for the first 30 or 45 minutes without one single word of dialogue. It's like, what are we doing here? Are we trying to light all of our money on fire? Next. So it's got to be protected. New ideas can just be thrown away. They can be terminated almost immediately if you're not willing to do the hard work, put your candor forward, believe in your idea, and try to shape it into something significant. At the same time, we have to protect these new ideas from a lack of maturation. We can become so in love with the early process when all of our ideas kind of suck that we don't do the rigorous work of maturing those ideas into something that actually works for us. You see, we have to learn in the creative process to feed the story. What often happens is somebody has an idea and it doesn't strike the room initially as a great idea. And so the first reaction is just to kill it, to just come against it and list all of the reasons that it might not work. A better option is to feed the story. If an idea isn't going to work, the idea will kill itself if it's given enough attention. And so one way to think about this is, as soon as someone brings in a train of thought, the room's job is to ride that train of thought as far as it can possibly go. And that train of thought, if it is truly pushed forward with candor and good intention, it will either reach its destination where it emerges as a fantastic idea, or it will fall off the tracks all on its own. And everyone conclusively will be able to see, or at least a majority will be able to see, exactly why it isn't going to work. We have to feed the idea. Let's not just throw it out because it is ugly in its first appearance. Let's push on it. Let's debate it. Let's talk about it. What is it trying to do? Where is it trying to go? How have we seen things like this be successful in the past? What would this look like if it actually worked for us? Feed the story, feed the story. No bad ideas, no stupid ideas. Not yet. That comes later with decisions and expectations and accountability. Right now, our hierarchy hats are off. We're pushing. Creativity is hard. And I think people get discouraged because they think a creative team or a creative process is going to be like summer camp. It's going to be like arts and crafts. We're going to come in and it's going to be nothing but fun and one good idea after the other. Sometimes at MetaChurch, our creative meetings are like 45 minutes of people just sitting frustrated, trying to think through ideas, and like 15 minutes of talking and hitting wall after wall. Sometimes it's 45 minutes of everyone being overwhelmingly excited about a new train of thought, only for that train to fall off the tracks right at the end of the meeting. Creativity takes work. If everyone could do it, then everyone would be succeeding. Everyone would be innovating. Everyone would be world class. It takes work. It takes effort. It's a grind. It takes candor. It takes not only giving true feedback, frank, real feedback, but also having the security in who you are and what you're working for, the mission that you believe in, to receive that feedback. It takes time. It takes feeding the story, feeding the idea, pushing that train of thought continually down the track as far as it can go until either you land on the right idea or you allow it to implode on itself. New ideas can't just be thrown out right away, but they also can't be put out to market lacking the maturity that they could have received if you would have just had the candor to actually evaluate it correctly. Courageous creativity always serves a greater mission. You can be creative for selfish means. You can be creative at the end of the day to try and, you know, just get more and more money or increase the bottom line. And that is the point of some businesses and some organizations. But what we're finding increasingly in the 21st century is that even things outside of the nonprofit world, even things outside of, uh, the service industry or even goods and services, even the people making the widgets or, making the shoes, and people want to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves. Consumers want to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves. And so what is your greater mission? You see, if you don't have a greater mission, then the competition goes from being all of us versus the world, our entire organization fighting together for something bigger than us. If you don't have that, the competition has to go somewhere and it goes internal. Now it becomes me fighting against you, coworkers fighting against each other. Courageous creativity is never me fighting you for position. It's you and me fighting for the mission. We're not trying to one up each other. This is an influence-based culture. We're not politicking our way to the top. We are coming together and we are rewarding the risky participation of true candor, true evaluation, always putting your ideas out, not being afraid to fail, feeding the story, taking every train of thought as far as you can until it reaches its own conclusion. At MetaChurch, we have our mission that has been stated for us. Before Jesus left earth, he gave us the Great Commission to go into all of the world and preach the gospel. And so we have a job to bring what we believe is the actual source of true eternal hope to as many people as we can get it in front of. And so our mission is set for us. And that doesn't mean that we are not fallible, broken people. That doesn't mean that we don't get into the creative process sometimes and our own insecurity surface to where it starts feeling like me versus you and my idea versus your idea, instead of me and you fighting for the best idea to serve the mission outside of us. When we do that right, we take the content, which is the scriptures, and that is what we base our mission off of. We take the content and we create creatively, courageously creative, the context. And when we get that right, we create key moments in our services and programs that stick with people, that begin to change things for people. And I wanted to give an example from the series that we're a part of right now. Right now, we're doing a series about priorities. We just started it. And I wish I could give away a little bit more of some of the creative elements that we're doing, but I know that some MetaChurch people listen to the podcast, and I don't want to ruin the next few weeks for them. But I do want to give kind of an insight into how this creative process worked. We got our brain trust together. And, again, we just call ours the creative team. And on the creative team, the first thing we do is an overview of the series that's coming up. Now, that's the content. And so here are the scriptures that we're going to, and here's what those scriptures say to us. And once we have that clear, we begin creating around it. And we're talking about priorities. And the reality is that there are a lot of people who have high levels of passion, incredible potential, very real skill sets. They have great intentions. And yet they don't know how to properly prioritize the people, places, and things in their life. And it sabotages how significant their impact could be. And so to properly prioritize your life will maximize your purpose. It will minimize your distractions, and it will multiply your impact in the world. It's so critical. And one of the key verses, and this is where we're going next week in the series, is from John 15. And John 15 is this extended metaphor that Jesus gives. And this is how he describes believers in Jesus. It says, we are the branches, and the branches are connected to Jesus, who is the vine, and God is the gardener or the vine dresser. And one of God's roles is to prune the branches so that we can produce more and more fruit. And so we started with some ideas like, what if we brought a plant, and we could have few plants for each service, and I could be up there with some pruning shears, and I could actually demonstrate pruning on a plant to show how essential it is to get rid of these lower branches that divert the water away from the fruit-bearing branches at the top of the plant. And that wasn't a horrible idea. However, it felt a little bit predictable. And so people brought their candor and their honest feedback. And what we started doing is feeding the story and talking about how we could make it bigger and how we could make it more memorable. And so we landed on the idea, instead of bringing a plant, me actually, in this weird sense, becoming the plant. Okay, so what would that look like? Well, we could take some icons that actually approximate areas of priority in our life. And so instead of the tree or the bush or the vine being the thing that becomes fruitful, it's like, how can we actually show people, make the invisible visible, and show people what wrong priorities are actually doing in our life? And so we started talking about what those icons would look like. And that's where we landed on categories. The categories that make up virtually all of our priorities are people, places, and things. And so for people, we put a mannequin on stage, and for places, we put a school desk, because even interestingly, I'd forgotten this, but even in Creativity Inc., he talks about how most of our securities are actually rooted all the way back to our elementary school experience. And then for things, we thought of like a giant, almost cartoonish bag of money. And so what would it look like to actually tie me to those things? And so if you're watching and actually seeing this on YouTube, you'll see this. If not, I'll describe it to you. We put those things on stage with me, and then we literally, with rope, tied me to them. This just happened on Sunday. And so for most of the sermon, I was dragging around a desk on my left wrist, a heavy bag of fake money, but a fake bag of money on my right wrist. Attached to my belt loop was a full-size mannequin that fell over and was dragging the ground. And people got to actually see what it looks like when we are tied to improper priorities. And the idea is like, our future is out ahead of us. Our purpose and potential is out ahead of us, but we are anchored to things in our past. And it was a struggle. I mean, I actually preached a little bit shorter than I normally preach, because I was struggling significantly. I was claustrophobic. I couldn't move. I was having to drag this desk, and all the books were flying off of it. The mannequin fell over and was dragging behind me. And, all of these things were happening, and people were seeing visibly the invisible truth of what happens when we tie ourselves to improper priorities. And, this is similar to what I feel like Pixar tries to do. Pixar takes like the idea of how our emotions play out, and they make the movie Inside Out, and they make all of our emotions these little animated characters, and they show how memory is formed, and they actually work with neurologists. And I've used Inside Out in sermon series because that's what they did. They made the invisible visible, and what a powerful creative context to be able to make the invisible visible for people. And so if I just get up and I just give a sermon about you need to set better priorities in your life, that's one thing, and everyone forgets it by Wednesday. But if I get up and I drag around a mannequin, a school desk, a giant bag of money, if the audience watches me struggle to actually move forward on the desk, there is a exponentially higher chance that people will remember, when they're struggling in life, exactly how important priorities are, and how improper priorities truly do hold us back from the life that we could be living. This is an example of many people in our creative meeting all coming together, fighting for the right ideas, fighting against the wrong ideas, getting passionate, and then following through, walking out of that meeting. Someone assigned to go get the mannequin. What is that? That's an expectation that gives them power to make decisions and the power to be held accountable. Who's going to get the desk? Who's going to actually come up with the mechanisms to tie the ropes to my arms? You know, you step out of the process and you step back into a positive hierarchy that isn't there to slow and stagnate, but is there to give structure to the best ideas, opinions, and evaluations. That happened not on the hierarchy, but with everyone having an equal voice. Courageous creativity always serves a greater mission. And as pastors and leaders of a church, I recognize we could get up and sing 3 songs and give a message. I mean, that is powerful in and of itself. It's the words of truth and the words of life. But we believe that we are called to be creative because we were created by a creator. We believe that God is the source of creativity and that he has called us to live our life as much in his image as possible. In the scriptures, the apostle Paul makes a statement. He says, I'll become all things to all people so that I might win some to the hope of Jesus. This came right after he stood up in the middle of Greece, surrounded by their pantheon of gods. And you know what he did? He didn't like just destroy them and judge them for not worshiping his God. Instead, it's this beautiful creative moment where he used their gods, and they had one God that had no name. And he basically made this incredible point that what if this one God with no name is actually the fullness of the true God that all of your other gods are trying to approximate? We're called to be creative people, and whether or not you are a religious person, a spiritual person, whether or not you are a church attender, whether or not you believe in God, whatever you're doing in your life will get better by doing it creatively. And maybe you can remember a time where you had passion about something. You had passion about a hobby. You had passion about a process, whatever it was. Something that was a creative outlet for you. If that's missing in your life, there is a good chance that you're missing out on the level of life you could be living, on the level of fulfillment, on happiness, on increased mental health. Creativity takes work, especially if you're doing it in a group setting. But it matters that you have a group of people because we are better together than we are alone. It matters in an organization that you're not living in the hierarchy horror of the 3 people at the top thinking that they actually have all of the best ideas. It matters that you come out of the creative process and everyone is clear on who holds the expectations, who makes what decisions, and how things are given account for. It matters that you push for candor, both to be given and to be received, that you reward that risky participation and the vulnerability of the people around you. And it matters that you are pointing towards a greater mission. It's not me versus you, it's us together pushing forward something that is exponentially bigger than ourselves. I want to thank you guys again for jumping on episode 10. We're just going to keep going, man. We're going to keep pushing this thing. I hope that this is helpful for you and it means something to you. If it does, I'd love for you to share this. If you're listening to this, make sure you're subscribed. If you're watching this, make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. It's 3 things all right in a row, 3 clicks. Like, that's the thumbs up, subscribe button, hit the notification bell. That's how we will build this channel over time. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitter, on Instagram, at Clayton Tyner. Use your voice. Let people know that this content is out there, and we will keep it going next week. I love you guys. I hope to see you there.